Good evening, everybody,
Good evening, everybody.
and welcome. All right, tonight's guest, um, Albert Burgess. I mean, what can I say? Um, Author of books on the Constitution, a very distinguished career with our constabulary. So much I could say about this man. A character within himself, I think you'd agree. I think everyone would agree. Everybody, please welcome Albert Burgess. Evening, Albert.
Hello
Evening,
there.
Albert.
Hello. Good
Yeah,
evening,
we are now
everybody.
live. Couple of things we want to go over tonight. So I'm going to read out one of the letters off your Facebook page, because a lot of people know, but some may not know, that you write a lot of fiction and a lot of letters, sometimes not fiction, to certain authorities. And you recently had a run-in because of one of these fictional letters. But I just want to read this one, because I read this I think it was about a week ago. So, and it's just some of the points you make in this. It's very clear cut to me, and I think if most people listen to it, I think to them it should be very clear cut itself. So, read the letter. I'm going to start reading the letter now. It's to Sir Mark Rowley, QPM, Commissioner of the Metropolis. It says, referencing moral courage and the law. Sir, not so many years back, holders of the office of constable had both the physical courage required to tackle dangerous men and the moral courage to do what was right, irrespective of any comeback against them. If we believe what we read in today's constables, they commit crime and their mates look the other way. I've got to scroll the screen. Corruption starts at the top and works its way down. I have faith in you and your deputies to clean up the Met. Today's officers are a bunch of scruffs. Far too many think that the tall hat means they can do what they like. Conviction rates are seriously low, but when officers dress like Christmas trees, all lit up with fluorescent jackets and can be seen from miles away, the detection rate is bound to be low. Officer safety is important, but it is more important that giving high-class protection to His Majesty's subjects, risk assessments take far too long and concentrate on officer safety rather than the safety of the public. For a number of reasons, public confidence in the police is at an all-time low. You have a number of officers who have committed criminal acts you say you cannot sack with the rules as they are. Sack them and let them sue for unfair dismissal. If you have the evidence, I cannot see any court reversing your decision. Previous commissioners have allowed police cars to advertise for a political party and LGBT nonsense. Officers taking the knees, visibly siding with one section of society over the rest. This nonsense has to stop. If I ever see an officer take the knee, my foot will engage with his head as the most effective way of explaining why she should stand tall. I have attached a copy of a letter to Rishi Sunak. Today's politicians think they can do what they like. We employ a police service to ensure they comply with the law. Aid to Ukraine, a rogue Nazi state, is fraudulent misappropriation of taxpayers' money. Our senior military officers are getting nervous about arming Ukraine as our own armed forces get weaker by the day. They are saying our armed forces have ammunition for 2 days and can no longer defend this ancient kingdom. Parliament is rife with corruption. Far too many who sit on NHS financing committees have shares in private health. So the NHS has to subcontract its work to private healthcare. These politicians laugh all the way to the bank. I have attached a copy of the 1701 Act of Settlement. Government will tell you a section dealing with naturalised subjects has been repealed by implied repeal by the 1949 Nationality Act. This is ordinary statute law. Sir John Laws in the Metric Martyrs case ruled a constitutional law cannot be repealed by a statute law. The Act of Settlement is major constitutional law, as it lays down the inheritance of the Crown and Crown we both serve. COVID has generated a fortune. We could not imagine. Matt Hancock's publication was given a large contract to supply PPE and promptly buff himself a large mansion. The copper in me would like to know how much of a backhander Hancock received along with the others who awarded COVID contracts. I believe your oath of office requires you to investigate these matters. It could be you hold the safety of this ancient kingdom in your hands. These inquiries require a very senior officer in charge. I trust your deputy. I think she is honest, courageous, and has started out well. A team of forensic accountants would need to not be amiss. Effectively submitted, Albert Burgess. See,
Spot on that.
I think so. I mean, like I said, the points you're making there about, we Gordon Bowden, for instance, has touched upon a lot of things like this in the past. I mean, there is so much going on for so many years. I mean, we do need, and I would say, without a shadow of a doubt, within the Ukraine, with COVID, with the WF, with the WHO, we need forensic accountants and we need good constables that are actually going to do their job. I mean, I'm sure you've got an opinion now, but I mean, it's a bit broad in your letter there. So,
well, let me say firstly that Cressida Dick's staff officer, I think it was Superintendent Simpson, I think, he wrote and told me that they are going to put all my letters on file now, but they will not reply to them and they will not investigate them. Now, this is something that Mr. Rowley hasn't come up with. The thing I was saying about police officers having no moral courage today, I'm going to tell you a story about a friend of mine called Andy. Andy was a police officer and the area car driver, and they took a shout to a domestic on the 20th floor of a block of flats. They got to the block of flats, they opened the door of the lift, and lying on the floor of the lift was a woman covered in blood with a claw hammer buried in the top of her head. Now, Andy turned around and said to her, he said, "You're going to be fine, darling. I'm a police officer. We'll get the ambulances on its way. Don't worry about anything. You're going to be fine." 10 months later, then he said to her, "Do you know who did this?" Now, every idiot in the world is called Albert. And she said, "Yes, it was my husband, Albert." So they've got her shot off to the hospital. Then Andy's gone and arrested her husband, Albert, and he's been charged with attempted murder. And got to the Old Bailey 10 months later. It's being heard in number 1 court, the Old Bailey. And the CPS barrister came up to him and he said, "We're dropping the case because the only witness we have is her. And because of the injuries to her head, she's lost her memory of what happened." So Andy said, "Well, can I give my evidence as a deathbed statement?" And he said to her, "Well, you have to do this under the police rules. If you want to take a deathbed statement, you have to say to somebody, 'Are you aware that you're dying and have you given up all hopes of survival?' If they say yes and yes, then everything they say after that you can use as a deathbed statement." But Andy said, "No, of course I didn't say that. My first aid training says I have to reassure the victim, not frighten them to death." So he said, "Well, you can't give your evidence as a deathbed statement." So a clerk of the court was walking past, so Andy grabbed him and said, "Look, go and see the judge in the case. Tell him there's a policeman out here who would like to talk to him." And back came the message, "No, the judge is not going to talk to you." So Andy said, "Well, look, you obviously misunderstood what I'm telling you. Tell the judge there's a police officer out here who is going to talk to him. He has the choice of opening the door and letting me in, or standing well back while I kick it off its hinges." So the judge let him in and said, "Right, officer," he said, "you better make this good or you're out of job by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'm not used to having police officers tell me they're going to kick my door in." So Andy said to him, "Well, I want to give my evidence as a deathbed statement." And the judge said to him, "Well, did you say to her, 'Are you aware that you're dying and have you given up your, all hopes of survival?'" And Andy said, "Well, no, of course I didn't. My first aid training says I have to reassure the victim, not frighten them to death. but I've been a police officer for 25 years, and I thought she was going to die. And from the look in her eyes, I think she thought she was going to die. And the judge sat there with his elbows on the desk and his hands on his chin on his hands like that for 10 minutes. Then he looked up and he said, "You've still got a job, officer. You can give your evidence as a deathbed statement." Albert was sentenced to 9 years in prison. On that day, on that time, when Andy had the moral courage to do what he believed was right, he changed the law of England. It's no longer necessary to say to somebody, "Are you aware of you dying, and have you given up all hopes of survival?" Because, you know, it was a stupid thing to say in the first place.
Yep.
But it goes back hundreds of years. But on that day, at that time, Andy changed the law of England because he had the moral courage to risk his career because he believed firmly that what he was doing was right and in the best interest of the woman and of the upholding of the law. And you don't have that in today's police force.
No. I mean, I don't think the police force has a true understanding of the law at all anymore.
No.
To be honest.
I think today. I mean, I was police officer for 13 years. I was a special constable. I worked 3 nights a week, every week. I would go on at sort of 7 o'clock in the evening with the intention of coming home 4 hours later. And quite frequently, in fact, more often than not, I was still there the following morning, sort of 6 o'clock in the morning, because I'd gone out. And at the last moment before I was coming off duty, I would make an arrest. Then I would have to process that arrest. I can't go away and leave it. I've got to process it, put it all through, get all the paperwork done and everything else so it can go to court. So I did an awful lot of hours. I was doing, on average, for the 13 years I was a police officer, 900 free policing hours a year. Now, that's a lot.
That is a fair amount.
And I made a large amount of arrests, quite a lot for crime, because I wasn't interested in, I stopped a lot of cars. I was looking for drink drivers, but I wasn't interested in giving out fixed penalty tickets to people. I would stop the car if they'd done something wrong. I would deal with it by words of advice rather than by a punitive fixed penalty ticket or a summons. And if they'd been drink driving, I would breathalyze them. If they failed the breath test, I would arrest them because drink drivers kill people. So you need to take them off the street. So I would do that. But mostly, I worked as a home beat officer. I worked on foot patrol. And I was interested in protecting the people on my beat. You know, I can't do anything about the whole country, but I can make sure that my beat is well policed.
Well, that's the thing.
And that's what I tried to do. And when I left Kilburn Police Station for the last time, my superintendent called me in, chief superintendent called me in, and he said, "I'm really sorry to lose you because all of our senior supervising special constabulary officers were all on suspension. And I'd been for a panel a couple of weeks beforehand for promotion, and I got turned down. And then the chief inspector called me in and said, "We'd like you to take over the running of the special constabulary." And I said, "No, it's only 2 weeks ago you told me I wasn't good enough." So he said, "Well, we've got nobody else, and you're the oldest special we've got, and the most sensible special we've got. So, you know, what can we do? We've got nobody else to do it." I said, "Well, I will do it, but I'm not doing it for you. I'll do it for the other specials." And when I was leaving the police station for the last time, chief superintendent called me in, and he said, "Albert," he said, "I'm really sorry to lose you. Since you've been running the specials, the morale has gone up in the special constabulary, attendance for training has gone up in the special constabulary, and attendance for duties has gone up in the special constabulary. And they are doing more proficient work and everything else." He said, "So really, I don't want to lose you." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, but you know, I've my day job has gone 50 miles north, and if I'm going to do a day's work and then get in my car and drive 50 miles to get here, then do a night's policing and drive 50 miles back, I'm going to end up getting killed on the motorway because I'll be too tired to drive properly.
Well,
So
you'd have to arrest yourself because you'd be doing the same as
What?
drunk drivers. You'd have to arrest yourself because you'd be doing the same as drunk drivers. You'd be putting people's lives at risk.
So you know that's what happened. I then transferred to Thames Valley Police. The worst bloody mistake I've ever done in my life. The first thing they told me at Thames Valley is, if there are more of them doing something than there are of us, we just let them get on with it. So, you know, and I thought, well, that's not the way I work, you know. And the very first night I went out in Tame, we went to look at an alarm in a school very early in the morning, 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning. And when I came out from the school, having satisfied myself it hadn't been broken into, and there were 12 blokes walking down the road, all come home from the pub, all a bit drunk. And one of them was carrying a traffic cone that he picked up from a hole in the road down by the pub. And he kicked it and he went across 4 gardens. And I walked over to him and I said to him, you might think you're Pele, but you're not. Pick it up and put it back where you found it. And he said, no. And I said, look, you're obviously not understanding what I'm saying to you. You can pick it up and you can walk it back to where you found it, or you can spend the next 6 hours in Aylesbury Police Station with me. So he picked it up and he's walking back down the road with it, and all his mates are singing out after him, you might think you're Pele, but you're not. You know? and you know, I think policing, in fact, I said to the 2 detectives from the anti-terrorist unit that came to see me, you don't need a university degree to be a police officer. What you need is common sense. And that's all you need. You don't even need to be able to read or write. As long as you've got common sense and you can deal with a situation, you can always tell somebody else who can read and write what's happened, and they can bloody well write it down for you. But when you're on the street, you're not actually writing very much. You're actually dealing all the time. So as long as you've got common sense, you can deal. And that I find is a lot different. And what I look at today on the films we see on the internet, and you've got one bloke, not particularly big, and about 5 officers piled onto him and got him on the ground, and they're all sort of sitting on top of him and everything else. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, what's happened to their training? Because I was taught Aikido in the police force. Now, Aikido it's sort of self-defense, and it's very good. And, you know, I put down on my own, with nobody else near me, much, much bigger people than these 5 officers are trying to restrain, you know, and I've put them down and I've got them handcuffed and everything else. In fact, one bloke was so big and so strong, he went to take a punch at me. I stepped back from it, let it go through, caught him in an arm lock, put him down on the ground. I've got one arm up his back, I've got my knee in his back, and the bugger was doing one arm press up with me on his back. I mean, he was so big and so strong.
Well, this is the thing. It's things like you just mentioned.
But I was able to put him down and contain him. You know, and it amazes me that police officers today don't seem able to do those things.
Well, this is the problem. That there was a massive change within art. Well, it's not no longer classed as the constabulary. It's now the police force. And if you, I spoke to many because I've witnessed it being said in the streets in London and other places. It's no longer the police constabulary. It's the police force. Emphasis on the force. So a lot of it is. It's about you get 5 constables onto. It doesn't matter if you're a 14-year-old girl or an 8-year-old man. It's you get overwhelming numbers and you use force as quick as possible. The whole point is fit.
I mean, a friend of mine's a member of the nobility, and I was chatting to his. I spoke to both his daughters. One was 28, one was 14 on the net, and the 14-year-old said to me, she said, "Oh, I've been asked if I want to take part in a film." is that a man's making a film, a Shakespeare film, and he wants me to have a starring role in it. And I said, do you know him? And she said, no. I said, where did you meet him? She said, on the net. So I said, what does he want you to do? She said, well, I've got to go to London to meet him. And I said to her, is he Muslim? And she said, yes. And I said, well, look, normally I wouldn't give you an order, but I'm telling you, you are not to go. No, I'm going to go. So I phoned her dad up, and of course, as usual, when it's important and you want somebody to answer the phone, they never do. So I went to the local police in Tame, and I said, look, can you get through? Because they had a royalty protection officer, these two girls. I said to her, can you get through? Because they were directly related to the Queen. And I said to her, I said, can you get through, or to the officer in Tame, I said to him, can you get through to Scotland Yard royalty protection for me? And can you ask them to contact this royalty protection officer who's looking after these girls? I gave them the girl's name. And all I know about her is her name is Lisa. So can you get them and then make sure that the 14-year-old does not get on the train? So Thames Valley Police decided that I was nuts and reported me to the mental health people in Aylesbury so that I could be sectioned. And the mental health people contacted my GP, and my GP said, don't be so bloody silly, he's the sanest man I know. And, you know, I'm not going to attempt to section him. But that's the standard. Now, I wrote to the chief constable at the time, and I said, look, this girl is a direct relative of the Queen's. They share the same great-grandparents. But she's a blood relative of the Queen's. And I said, it doesn't matter whether the 14-year-old girl in question is a princess or a Cockney orange seller's daughter. We have an absolute duty as police officers to do everything in our power to protect them. I said, now, if she'd got to London, she didn't, because I actually spoke to her older sister, and her older sister and the police detective that was doing the royalty protection for them, they caught her getting on a train to London. So it was that close, really. And I said to him, if this girl had been raped and prostituted, I'd leave it for you to explain to the Queen exactly why she got raped and prostituted. And the reason is because your officers were too stupid to do what they were asked to do, you know? And
well,
I
this
said
is the thing.
Yeah, you can forget your knighthood and your keys to the House of Lords because you won't get them. But the point is that the police today, they have, in my opinion, completely lost the plot. Now, there are a lot of good officers out there who do the best that they can.
Yeah.
But the Met had 80 Muslim officers, and they had to run anti-corruption courses for them because all 80 were corrupt. Now, if I had been corrupt in the Met, they'd have arrested me, they'd have charged me, and I'd have gone to court and probably gone to prison.
Yeah.
But the 80 Muslim officers get an anti-corruption course, which is not going to stop them being corrupt.
No, especially if they are firmly religious.
You know, and it is totally wrong. And the vetting system for officers today, that started to go on wrong when I was in the police force, when a lot of Asians came along and said, well, we want to join the police, but we're too short. We can't meet the height standard. So they dropped the height standard. And then you get a lot of West Indian officers coming along saying, I want to join the police, but they drop the education standard to let them in. And of course, you really can't do that. You have to have a set of standards and you have to stick rigidly to them. Otherwise, you get a police force that just doesn't work. And at the moment, forces all over this country are not working.
Exactly. I think a lot of it is to do with the new wave of thinking. It's sort of like we see it from our schools up. We have it in the military. It's like even the SAS. They've actually, I believe, they did actually drop their standards to allow certain people to actually become members of the SAS, even though they shouldn't have done. We have it in schools. It's that kind of mentality. It's everybody gets a medal for participating. So it's no longer we have like a bar set, like you say, a standard. We don't have that no more.
When my son was 9, his mother, from whom I was divorced, phoned me up and said he's very upset. And I said, why? He said, well, he goes to a football club on a Saturday morning, and the man who picks him up is telling him things about what his sister's doing with her boyfriend of a sexual nature, and it's upsetting him. Well, his sister was 14, and I knew for a fact she didn't have a boyfriend to do anything with anyway. But anyway, I went round to see him, and I told him I'd come round to see him, tell me what happened. He told me. I said, was anybody else in the car when this was being said? And they said, yes. And I said, well, let's go and find them. So we walked around the streets, and we found each of his mates separately. And I said, look, I'm Peter's dad, and I'm also a policeman. Can you tell me what's being said to you in the car? Or what's being said to Peter in the car? And they all told me the same story. So I said to each kid in turn, now I want you to go home, tell your mum I've spoken to you, tell her that another policeman will be coming to talk to you, and your mum or your dad will have to be with you while you talk to that policeman. So they all did that. I then went back up and I phoned the local West Hampstead police station, told them what the problem was, and they said, oh, there's no offences. And I said, well, you won't know until you get here, will you? And in the Met, there's a form 78. If a kid comes to your attention for any reason whatsoever, he's pushed an old lady out of the way of a speeding bus, in which case he gets a nice letter from the chief superintendent. He gets an invite to tea at the police station, a ride in a police car, and he gets to see the police dogs and the horses. So, if he's been caught shoplifting and that gets filled in, it then goes to youth and community and social services. So I said to them, I said, well, you won't know till you get here, do you? So 2 hours later, nobody's come. So I phoned them up and I said, where are you? And they said, oh, we discussed it. We're not coming because no offences. I said, if I haven't got a man with a blue pointed hat stood in front of me in 5 minutes, my next phone call after that is going to be to the complaints department at Scotland Yard. Well, the area car came round the corner on blues and twos and on 2 wheels. And they got out, 2 very officious police officers, got a clipboard, they listened to what I had to say, and they said, there's nothing we can do. And I said, are you sure there's nothing you can do? They said, yep, there's nothing we can do. And I said, you're positive about that? And they said, yeah, absolutely, we're positive about that. And I said, oh, you're certain? Yeah, we're certain. What about a Form 78 on the youth club? And you could see recognition coming in their eyes. He is Job. And I said, yes, you're absolutely right. I am Job. Now, I don't care whether you investigate this or I investigate it. I'm asking you to investigate it because it's on your ground. But if I investigate it, there's going to be a bigger fucking bang at West Hampstead Police Station than there ever was at Hiroshima. And they went away and they investigated. And although he hadn't actually laid a finger on my son, he was convicted and sent to prison for 2 serious assaults on 2 of the other boys. You know, and if I hadn't been a police officer, nothing would have been done about it. And my son would have been a victim as well. Well, he wouldn't, because we'd have stopped him going to the football club. But, you know, he could have been a victim as well. And I put it down just to laziness on the part of the police.
Well, this is it. This is the problem. I think a lot of it is. It's not. I don't think it's just so much laziness. I think we've now got a set of targets. Most of them targets, if you actually look into it, have some sort of financial end to it, which often lands up in the hands of bailiff companies that are actually shareholders of actually high up constables and other people like that who have a vested interest. That's the problem. Because I'd just like to say, anybody in the chat, if you've got any questions for Albert, because about Constitution, common law, anything like that, please stick them in the chat and we'll get Albert to answer them. So I want to talk to you a little bit about Albert, about the book you wrote. If you'd like to tell people about that and tell people how they can get hold of that book, because I've said to many, this is a brilliant. If you don't know about the Constitution, and that this is the perfect place to start.
After I'd retired from the police force and I saw what was going wrong, I decided to study, and I studied constitutional law, the history and development of the English Constitution. I've gone on to study the history and development of common law. Now, I wrote this book A Layman's Guide to the English Constitution, which you can buy. It costs you £7 if you buy it from Lulu, the publishing company, online. Or you can email me at albertburgess@hotmail.com, which is all one word, all lowercase. And you can get me, I will send you the version off of my desktop, which is twice the size of this, because it contains an awful lot of information about common law in it, which this one doesn't. This is purely constitutional law. Now, one of the things that really surprised me was the total lack of knowledge of English law that the English people have.
Yes, I think that's by design.
And basically how gullible the English people are. When people stand up and tell them the most ridiculous things, they believe it.
Mm-hmm.
And they believe it, and you cannot talk them out of it. Like the flat earthers. You know, the earth is flat.
Let's look at it.
Everybody knows it isn't, but you can't persuade them that it's round, or more or less round. And it's the same with this. And the free man on the land movement has a lot to answer for. And basically, Schaefer Cox in America started this. It then went to Canada with, I can't think of his name. It then came to England with John Harris. And they talk absolute rubbish. And John Harris was in my living room. I knew Don. I liked John.
I mean, don't get me wrong. They do have facts of constitutional and common law within some what they said, but there is some bits I think that are probably more.
I had 2 books
romanticised.
I had 2 books, both over 100 years old, on Elizabethan law. And so I said to John, "Look, you can have one of these." And I gave John a book on Elizabethan law, and he put it in his bag, and he said, "Of course I won't look at it." He said, "Of course I won't look at it." And I said, "Really, why not?" And he said, "Well, I don't do any research." And I said to him, "Well, how do you get the information that you talk about?" And he said, "Well, people just tell me, and I pass it on." And I said, "What do you do to check that what they've told you is accurate?" He said, "Nothing. I just get told it and I pass it on." And of course, a lot of it is crap. A lot of people got into serious trouble over it because they followed it. They followed what I used to call the John Harris book of sheer bloody lunacy. And they were getting arrested left, right, and bloody centre.
We do have a question for you, Albert, in a minute.
Yeah, policemen stopped the car and they refused to give him their name and address and the details because they didn't want to contract with him, because if they contracted with a policeman, he would own them and he could do what he liked with them. Now, I tell people I've stopped some cars with some cracking good-looking women in that I wouldn't have minded owning for a few hours. But it's not worked like that. It doesn't. It
can't take you anywhere, Albert.
You know, what your policeman actually wants to know is it your car? Is it licensed? Do you have a license to drive it? Is it MOT'd? Is it insured? And why the hell have you just run over the vicar?
But that is the thing.
That's what the policeman wants to know. He's not no policeman in the world is even remotely interested in contracting with you. So
because they don't tell us what's on.
These people are getting arrested for obstructing an officer in the execution of his duty, which is a criminal offence. And then they contact me and they say, "How do I get out of this?" And I said, "Well, you can't. You know, the paperwork's already been done. It's already in the system. You can't. All you can do is try for damage limitation. You're going to be convicted. You're going to have a fine. Go and find the officer that's arrested you. Tell him that you've just had the mother and father aroused with your wife. Most policemen are married. They'll understand that. And basically, you wanted to kick somebody, and unfortunately, he was the first one you found. You're really sorry for wasting his time, and you apologise profusely for the way that you treated him. If he's a half-decent bloke, which most coppers are, How he gives his evidence in court depends upon whether you get £100 fine or a £350 fine.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And so basically, a lot of people were getting into trouble over what the free man on the land people were telling them. And there's just so much.
We do have a question, but it's like break that
Okay.
now. Well, I just want to touch upon what you just said, though. It's like, it is true, a constable does have every right to inquire. But I would put to you Rice versus Connolly, until no constable has a right to demand any identification or any notification of anyone unless they have actually committed a crime. Rice versus Connolly. There's case law for that. But there is. I don't want to linger too much on that. There's a question.
That actually depends upon the circumstances. If you're in charge of a mechanically propelled vehicle, you are required to give him your details. By law, you're required. And if you don't, you can get arrested, and people are being arrested for it.
But Rice versus Connolly actually involves a motor vehicle being stopped.
The reason for that is, I, as a police officer, I stop a car. I want to know, is it your car, or have you just nicked it? Because I'd rather get it back to the owner in one piece than after you've burnt it out. So I want to know if you've just nicked it. If it is your car, do you have a current license to drive it? If it is your car, is it insured? Is it road tax? Is it MOT'd?
But until there's something that's flagged with breaching the crime,
run over the vicar.
I mean, because I'd argue just to stop somebody when there is absolutely no crime committed, that'd be a presumption of guilt.
If somebody is on foot, let's take stop and search in the street. If somebody is on foot and you have reasonable grounds for believing that they have either a prohibited substance or a prohibited item on them, then what you're supposed to do is you go over, you say, "Excuse me, sir, excuse me, madam, I am Constable so-and-so from such and such a police station. I've got reasonable grounds for believing that you have a prohibited item on you. And I propose to search you with a view to finding that item. If you require a copy of the record of the search, then you can apply for that up to 1 year from today at my police station."
Actually, I think it's a week now. I think it's a week.
Yeah.
I think it's 7 days or 30 days now.
I short-circuited that because I had a piece of carbon paper in my 5090 book. And basically, when I wrote it out, it would make a carbon copy. So I would keep the original and I'd give them the carbon copy there and then. So I short-circuit that. But
we do have a question.
If that person, I say to them, right, I've completed the search, I haven't found anything. I mean, if I have found it, I'm going to arrest them, aren't they? So, you know, at that particular time, I'm not interested in their name, they're nicked. So they're coming with me anyway. But if I haven't found it, I say to them, well, I have to fill in this record of search now. Can I have your name and your date of birth and where you live? And they say no. Then I have no power to ask them to give that. I have no power to do that at all. What I do then is I simply fill in a brief description of what they looked like in the book.
This is the very intricate discussion of the thin line between committing a crime and having reasonable suspicion of someone committing a crime. I mean, just because you think someone may have something on you, I truly don't believe and go, that person looks a bit dodgy, or because you're judging someone by their looks, you're going, he looks like he might have drugs on him, I'm going to go and search him. I don't think that's right. I think that actually breaches the fundamental principles of the spirit of law, personally. I do need to ask a question because this person's been waiting, if you don't mind, because we did sort of say three. And I think this is, I'm going to throw this one to you, Albert, because this is, I've actually thought about this, I've looked into a bit of this myself, and I think this would be a nice question for you to get your teeth into, actually. Mark 21, he's got a question on Northern Ireland, and he said, how can we fight against the betrayal of the Act of Union? Is this a direct breach of our constitutional rights?
Well, let's take the arrest and charging and prosecuting of our soldiers over Northern Ireland
Exactly.
over shooting people. Originally, all of the judges in England in Elizabeth I's day, they had a conference and they decided that every English person between the age of 12 and 60 had to carry arms so that they could put down a rebellion or a criminal affray, or resist the invasion of this country. They had to carry arms. And they didn't have to wait for an order from a magistrate or a constable or anybody else. They saw somebody rampaging up the beaches, armed to the back teeth to take the country over. They just grabbed their bow and arrow and their sword, and they'd go to war on their own benefit, on their own opinion, and that was perfectly legal. Now,
ours is a bit different because a lot of people get it confused with the Americans' right to bear arms. We have a duty to be proficient in arms all times and to carry arms.
Chance, Nathan, I'll get to that. Now, in 1837, we had Bristol riots over 3 days, and the army was called in to actually put that down. Now, the army went in there and they shot a few people. There was a resulting court case, and the Lord Chief Justice at the time presided at the case. And he said that when a soldier is used to restore the rule of law, he does not do that in his capacity as a soldier, but in his common law duty as a private subject of the crown. And although he has military grade weapons, he is not a soldier when he's doing it. No. If he shoots a rioter, that is a lawful killing. If he shoots somebody, he missed the rioter and he shot somebody 300 yards behind him, a lady pushing a pram with a baby in it, had nothing to do with the riot at all. That is an accidental killing for which no benefit, no penalty applies. Now, that applies equally to somebody like you or I. Now, in order to do,
we have a duty to keep the Queen's peace.
In order to do that, it's essential that we possess the arms necessary to actually arm ourselves, put ourselves on the street, and prevent an unlawful affray or a riot or an invasion of the country. Now, in 1919, after the First World War, a lot of soldiers were coming back with weapons as souvenirs. So they'd come back here with a Mauser rifle and a Luger pistol, or they'd come back with their 3.8 service revolver or 4.4 service revolver. And there were no gun laws worth talking about. So the government were frightened that because these soldiers were coming back and there was no work for them, and in some places nowhere for them to live, that the soldiers who were battle trained and battle hardened would suddenly take a dislike to government and descend on Parliament and shoot them all. Which, you know, a lot of us might think is a good idea, particularly today with this lot.
Well, there was actually an incident where the army come back and did do that, but never fired a shot.
Nevertheless, they brought in the 1920 Firearms Act, which restricted the use of firearms to the people who could have firearms. Since then, we've had several other Firearms Acts. We had Firearms Acts after Dunblane and Hungerford. But the people at Ryan at Hungerford and the other guy whose name escapes me at Dunblane, they had legally owned guns, but they also had illegally owned guns. So if they hadn't been able to get legally owned guns, they'd have still had the illegally owned guns.
This is
and the fact is that when they went round shooting people, had Michael Ryan, for example, at Hungerford, gone in and started shooting people in a town where everybody had a gun, then it wouldn't be long, would it, before a few of the granddads and the dads came out on the street with their hunting rifle and shot Michael Ryan. And would have saved a lot of lives as a result of that. So it is the government's fault that the people of this country are not able to defend themselves. if you take every major city where you have major amounts of gun and knife crime.
Yeah.
But none of these guns are legally owned.
No.
And because the civilian population are not allowed to have guns, then they are able to run around virtually with impunity, committing murders left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
Whereas if the population was able to be armed, a goodly number of them would go out on the street when a gunfight started. And the only provision I would make about legally owning guns is that you have to qualify.
Yes.
On their use.
I would say psycho evaluation, and you have to be proficient.
Yeah. So
safety.
if you qualified, you've got a legally owned gun and you've qualified in its use, which means you can fire and hit what you aim at, then in point of fact, the gunmen around all these cities all around England would very soon be dead. You know, they would be dead.
Well, this is the argument they use a lot in America, isn't it? And it has happened many times in America. Is when you have bad people with bad intentions will get hold of a weapon and they'll use it. But once you remove the ability for good people with the ability to hold weapons away from them, you make a population vulnerable. I mean, we could talk about this all day about governments for time immemorial removing arms from their people, and then you get a tyranny and you get oppression, you get a very violent police force or some malicious sort of institution.
Well, we do have a violent police force, and it is wrong. I mean, I saw a thing. They'd had their march at Hyde Park. There was a band playing. There were several hundred people standing around listening to the music and having a little dance away, and all of a sudden a perfectly peaceful crowd of people are suddenly attacked by baton wielding police officers from the territorial support groups, who start beating the living daylights out of everybody there. Every one of those officers should have been arrested and charged.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, because it is a very tricky thing when you talk about self-defense against the constable. I mean, what would you say would be the point of what would argue for a good reason for self-defense against a constable?
The fact is, if a constable's attacking you and you defend yourself, well, you have every right to do that because you're being attacked. The constable's breaking the law. He's not acting in his capacity as a constable. But when the other 4 or 5 constables come along and land on your back and drag you off kicking and screaming, then in point of fact, they're going to write the charges up so that you get convicted, you know? And what we should have is officers who are prepared to look at other officers' behavior and say, this is not acceptable. You know, this is not acceptable. And to do things about it, you know? And to say to officers, you know, if you do that again, I'm going to arrest you. You know,
well, because we have this.
Let them know that they don't have a green light to do what they like.
Exactly. I mean, you mentioned a sort of a scenario, and we have actually seen this where we've seen girls as young as 14 literally manhandled, thrown to the floor, and a number of constables leaped on top. I mean, disproportionate aggression and violence, and we see it a lot in London in the protests. I mean, you're talking about a crowd of people who are unarmed, not throwing projectiles. All they're throwing is a bit of harsh language. But for some reason, the constables seem fit that they can draw their batons, get in riot gear, and then start. I mean, I would argue the fact, if you've got a crowd of people who's disgruntled, and they're going to be disgruntled, and they're entitled to be disgruntled, and they're just throwing a bit of harsh language, and they're not trashing the place or burning the place down, I would argue that as soon as the constables suit up in riot gear, I mean, you've got to remember, assault is the threat of violence. So the constables not in their own action, actually threatening violence and breaching the Queen's peace. I mean, I think there's enough video evidence out there, and it's like you say, why are they not being prosecuted? Why are they not even being questioned by their superiors?
I did write to Cressida Dick about this, and I did say to her, you know, It doesn't matter if you've got 300,000 people marching on the streets of London, which they have had.
Mm.
You know, if you've got that number of people riding on the streets of London, and you attack them with your riot police. Now, understand, you've got 30,000 policemen for the whole of London.
Yeah.
Most of them are still going to be on the beat doing what they're paid to do, which is their own local area. Mm. And then you're then going to have four shifts for those policemen because they can't be on duty 24 hours a day. So they have 4 shifts, A, B, C, and D. So that one shift is on relief. They're not on duty, and they're not going to be on duty for a week. And the other lot are on duty for 8 hours a day, right, throughout the day. So if you take that number of officers for those shifts, then you reduce the amount of officers that you have available to you. And so you end up with just a few hundred territorial support group officers. Now, if the territorial support group officers start attacking people willy-nilly for no good reason, and those 300,000 people turn around and say, no, we're not having this, then they are going to put all your territorial support officers in hospital.
Well, this is the thing.
There's nothing you can do about it. And you could call every officer back off duty and put all 30,000 officers in the street. That's including the ones who only ever push pens in offices. You can put them all out on the street, and they are all going to end up in hospital because there are 30,000 of you in total, and there are 300,000 of the public.
And eventually, any peaceful society will break. Exactly.
So what you have to do is you have to ensure that your officers behave properly, don't willy-nilly attack people just because, you know, the chief superintendent at the time feels that he's going to make a name for himself and arrest all these people, put half of them in hospital while he's doing it. You know, that chief superintendent shouldn't be in the job. He should be sacked because he's forgotten what he's there for.
It's not just that. It's when you get commanding constables and that lot that are actually telling these people to go and do this. I don't think the consideration is taken by these ones who give the orders that are never actually there on the front line. To the fact that these constables have not only got to go and actually be violent towards people, that some of them are actually going to live in the communities with the people that they're actually being violent towards. So they're at a higher risk. It's like, eventually the public will bite back if you all buy the fear or the sword or force. Eventually you're going to get bite back. I think this is I think this is like we were talking the other day. This is where constables are going to have to realise that they have a duty.
If the public fight back, and there are enough of them, they don't need weapons of any kind because they will simply roll over the police. And if they decide to use weapons, then you're going to have an awful lot of seriously injured police officers, if not dead police officers, lying in the street. And that defeats the object of the rule of law.
Exactly, and the spirit of law with that as well.
Yeah,
and we have another comment from Mark.
But you know, there are officers. I don't take you back a few years now. Do you remember when Arsenal won the cup 6-0?
2 seconds, because Mark, who asked the question, he just sort of said, he says he doesn't want to be pushy, but he's kind of asking for the answer because we haven't answered it. Yes or no about Northern Ireland? Can they petition the monarch to refuse royal assent?
I actually wrote about Northern Ireland. I actually wrote to a major general.
Because I'd say yes. I say yes. From my understanding, yes, well, absolutely, 100%.
Petition the monarch. But I actually wrote to a brigadier general, and I sent him the relevant legislation, and I said that each of these soldiers who's been arrested is not able to be arrested legally because they are carrying out a common law duty to restore the rule of law. That's what they're doing. They're there to restore the rule of law. Now,
again, look at the legislation around the Bristol riots.
And I gave him the legislation, and I asked him to stop the prosecutions of all these soldiers. Now, to be fair to him, he took it up. Brigadier General Neil, I think his name was, and he took it up. I then got a letter from the Army legal people. And the Army legal people said, oh, well, you know, they've changed the law since then. So I wrote back to the Army legal people and I said, well, look, I'm English. Can you tell me exactly which law it is that was passed that says that I, as a natural born Englishman, cannot arm myself and put myself on the street to restore the rule of law or to prevent the invasion of my country? Can you tell me which law they passed that says I can't do that?
Yeah, law, not regulation.
Yeah, but can you tell me which law they have passed that says I can't do that? Of course, there is no law that says I can't do that. There are a lot of laws that say I must do that.
There is very much so.
You know, our common law is full of the fact that I must do that.
I mean, this is the thing. We do actually have a constitutional duty, and we actually have a common law obligation to actually put down and keep the peace. So,
I'm still waiting for the Army legal department to answer the question, and it's the same with the police force. I asked the commissioner of the police or chief constable a question about something that they've done, and I asked them, "Can you tell me where you get the authority to do this?" And the silence is deafening. Because they don't have an authority to do it.
No.
They do not have an authority to do it. And you know, when Arsenal won the cup 6-0, I was on the beat and I passed an Arsenal pub and it was midnight and I was with a young copper, and as we passed you could hear all the singing going on inside and they were having a great time. And the young copper said to me, he said, I suppose we better go and shut them down. And I said, no, leave them alone. They're having a good time. You know, they leave them alone. And we were walking back, and then this bloke in Arsenal colours came hairing past me. He said, you better get up there, mate. All your mates are up there. So we turned around and we were walking back. And as we were walking back, you could hear all the singing. My young mate that I'm with, he starts to run. I said, what are you running for? No need to run. They are happy. They're singing. Why are you running? You know? When we got to the square, as we walked into the square where the pub was, it went deathly silent. And there were 3 or 4 TSG vans there and a lot of our police cars, but none of our officers locally got out of their police cars. And then I saw this bloke run across and sitting on a park bench in the middle of 2 or 4 other people, as if, you know, not me, I've been here all night. And then they dragged him away. And I turned around, there was a woman in a very smart, it's a 30-year-old woman in a very smart skirt suit in the Arsenal colours. Very good-looking girl. And all of a sudden, she took 1 pace forward, she put her arms out like this, and she said, he ain't done nothing. And then 2 officers arrived from behind, picked her up and dragged her off. And I thought, well, that's a bit off. You know, she hasn't done anything to justify arrest. When I got back to the police station, she was coming out the police station and she was covered in blood with a big bandage round her head. And my young mate said to me, he said, I've got to go to work in the morning. Can you go to the hospital with her? And I said, yeah, of course I can. So I jumped in the ambulance with her and I said, what the hell happened to you? She said, I don't know. She said, they picked me up and they threw me in the back of a police carrier. And I think I must have hit my head on a nut or something on one of the seats. Cut all my head open. So she ended up having 27 stitches in her head. So it's quite a bad cut. And so I've got her story. I've got her story. I wrote my name and my shoulder number on a piece of Met paper. And I said, look, if you complain about this, and I think you should, get the investigating officer to come and talk to me. And I went back down the police station and I photocopied all my pocketbook entry on the issue. And then I wrote what they called a 991 statement. It's now MG11s. So it was 991 statement. And I wrote that out and I put it in my locker in a folder with the photocopies of my pocketbook entry. And about 10 months later, I get told about officers from the complaints department coming to see me. So I went and got my notes out of the cupboard and I copied them out again and put today's date on them and put them back in the folder, and I took up the originals. And the officer said to me, a chief inspector from one area complaint said to me, well, we come to take a statement off of you. I said, here's my statement written at the time and at the scene. And he said, no, I don't want that one. And we have to take our own statement. I said, this is my statement written at the time and at the scene. This is the only statement you're getting. This is a copy of my pocketbook entry, which is certified.
Yeah, and that is FEMA process.
Pocketbook entry. So he took it away, and then 9 months later, again, 10 months later, I get a call. Would I, present myself? This is an inspector and a sergeant from one area complaints want to talk to me. So I went to the police station and I religiously copied out by hand my original statement, dated it with today's date and everything else. And then when the sergeant said to me, right, we need to take your statement, I said, here's my statement. Here's a copy of my pocketbook entry. And he said, no, we need a different statement to that. And I said, well, this is the statement you're getting. So they took it away. And then 10 months later, I get sent for, I've got 2 lawyers from the police legal department. And they said, why are you doing this? And I said, because when I saw her arrested and she hadn't done anything to justify arrest. The next time I saw her, she's badly injured, which means she was injured in police custody, which means that we fucked up somewhere along the line. So, that needs to be sorted out. And they said, well, we want a statement off you. And I gave them a copy of my first statement. I said, here's my first statement. Here's a certified copy of my pocketbook entry. And then they said, no, we don't want this. We have to take our own statement. I said, well, that's the statement you're getting. Now, the woman got 26 grand compensation. And the report that came out with it said that the reason she got the £26,000 compensation was because there was a special constable who refused to change his statement.
As it should be. But this is the problem we have with the police force today. The police force today will bend, so there's literally, I'd say, about probably 1, maybe 3% max of the whole police force we have in the whole of our country, in the whole United Kingdom, that will actually be honest about themselves. That most of them just fold because they get so much peer pressure. There's a lot of bullying in the police force as well today, which a lot of people don't realise. So if somebody does, a lot of police think they can do what they want. I mean, you don't really have to do much digging to understand how rife it is of constables actually murdering people, raping people. Like you just mentioned, assaulting people happens, an unfair assault and unlawful assault happens quite a lot. But we haven't got the constables like you and as it were back then that will actually do this anymore.
When Tony Blair gave the IRA a dispensation for their crimes of murder and torture, and said to the IRA that we would prosecute our own troops and not them, he gave them a dispensation. Now, the Bill of Rights of 1689 says that dispensations, as they have latterly been given, are void and not lawful.
Yep.
So Tony Blair, when he gave that dispensation, somewhere a judge should have said to him, you can't do that, that's illegal.
I've raised this point to some vets and stuff like that, but they're only, a lot of them don't really want to understand it.
Him, you can't do that, it's illegal. But they didn't do that.
And this is the thing, and the fact that they have done it doesn't make it standing, it doesn't make it lawful, because it's still unlawful, it's still void.
Oh, absolutely, because the Bill of Rights, like Magna Carta, is major constitutional law. Habeas corpus first came into being with Alfred the Great. It's major constitutional law.
Well, this is where we see, because some people kind of want people to go with equity over common law, but what a lot of people don't realise is, like you mentioned, habeas corpus. That's where equity is in, I would say, in its purest form, because habeas corpus is equity. It's complete impartiality. It's complete fairness. So you don't have a one-way thing, but equity law in what it's become.
Do you know why our courts are acknowledged for 1,000 years to be the most honest and straight courts in the country? Forget Judge Jeffreys in the reign, James I, Charles I, Judge Jeffreys.
James I.
But in Alfred the Great's day, a bloke was charged with a crime, and the judge just told the jury to go home and found him guilty, and he hung him. And then, in another case, another judge, 9 of the 12 jurors decided the man wasn't guilty, or was guilty, but 3 wouldn't. So the judge sacked those 3 jurors, interviewed all their replacements, and found 3 who would find him guilty, put them in. Alfred the Great hung both those judges.
Yep.
And it's because of this fear that Alfred the Great put in, that he would uphold the law without any preferences one way or another. It would be upheld equally for everybody. And if you broke the law, then you would suffer. And if you were a judge and you broke the court procedures the way they should have been applied, then you're going to hang.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is the thing. You talk about our English courts and how they should be. I mean, I can't remember his name now. But there was actually a judge who was killed, and there was actually a seat in a court that was actually bound. His skin was leathered and bound. The chair was actually bound with his skin. And his judge, his son, when made a judge, was made to sit on the chair, made of his father's skin.
Have you heard of Chief Justice Vaughan? Common Pleas.
Yeah.
Well, he was Welsh, but we won't hold that against him. He had a case. James I was appointing Catholics into positions as army officers, and at the time that was illegal. And he gave them a dispensation, so they couldn't be prosecuted, although what they were doing was illegal. And Chief Justice Vaughan, he heard the case on it. He also heard the case on the freedom of the jury to decide. Some people published some paperwork which the government didn't like, and they put them on trial. The jury found them not guilty, and the judge sent the jury to prison, and it ended up in front of Chief Justice Vaughan. And Chief Justice Vaughan said, no.
I vaguely remember this, yeah.
Jury's thing is that. But anyway, Chief Justice Vaughan, on the dispensation bit, he said that if a man owns a field, and in the middle of his field is a river, and over that river is a bridge, the king cannot give that man a dispensation not to maintain his bridge. Because if somebody walks over that bridge, and because of its bad state of repair, it collapses and injures him, then in point of fact, he would not be able to claim for damages. And the king does not have a right to grant a dispensation which prevents him claiming for damages.
Well,
that was just born.
Well,
67, I think.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we're sort of seeing the involvement of his like with Parliament.
Is that a Castle's History of England behind you?
Yes, Castle's History of England.
Yeah, I've got 2 of them, a 9-volume and an 8-volume presentation set.
Yeah, I've got both.
The great books.
And I've got the Imperial Dictionary of the English Language as well. The full volume. So I've got most of my books are actually in the loft, because as you can see, I'm on temporary bookshelves, and even these are breaking. So I've got to either build or buy a bookshelf that could actually take all my books. But most of them in the loft. I've got a little one down there, and I've got a little one here. So I'm just sort of making do with what I can at the moment.
My house is full of books.
But yeah, I have some very old books. It's like most of my books are sort of like 100 odd years old.
I've got the full works
kind of pieces.
I've got the full works of Henry de Bracton. But the most useful book, and I think you've got it, is Select Statutes of English Constitutional Law.
I've got a few. I think I have, yes.
Yeah,
I've got I've got statutes from Elizabeth and James I. I've got the Illustrated English Constitutional.
If anybody's got, if anybody wants to read a good law book, you want to try and get Select Statutes of English Constitutional Law.
That's not too bad as well. That's Kieran Lawson's constitution cases in constitutional law. That's not a bad book as
Yeah.
well. I have a few. I said I've got more down. I have a few. Like I said, I've got more
I
down
know.
there. I've got a few houses.
I'm falling over books everywhere as well. You get into this and it gets a grip of you.
It does. It does.
I'm going to tell you now that if you want good English history books and old law books, then what you want to do is go and find your local Oxfam bookshop, because they're very, very good. Now, I wanted English select statutes. I couldn't buy it online. And so I went to the Bodleian Library and I said, look, I want to read a reader's pass. So I can come in and read this select statutes. And they looked on their system and said, we haven't got it. So I contacted the British Library in London and said, I want a reader's pass so I can come in and read the select statutes book. And they said, no, we haven't got it. So I then walked in 2 weeks later into the Oxfam bookshop in Tame, and they had it on the shelf for $14.95. One of the best buys I've ever had. It's got so much information in it.
My only thing is some of my books, like I said, like I've introduced that some of them, like by the time I got them, fall into pieces. So I do actually want to get some of them restored, but it's quite expensive. But that's my only thing. Is like, I don't know. I'm one of these people. I don't like it when people bend the spine of a book back and bend it around each other. I like you to read a book properly. It's one of them. There's things that should be treasured, especially when this is why I like old books, because in when we talk about law and our history and a lot of things, I mean, you can still argue that to the victor writes the version of it. But
well,
if we're talking law, for instance, if you go on .gov sites and to extent even Hansard, you'll see an absolute subversion and difference to what law. I mean, like I say, when we're talking like the spirit of law and the fundamental principles of law, like common law. Although I'll say the Attorney General, in his disclosure, you'll see now common law after many years of most of us, and like people like you and yourself, out a fight for common law to come back. The Attorney General, in his disclosure rules, is actually you've now got common law backing that, and you've got common law sort of like principles back into all that, and it's being mentioned a lot now.
I'm gratified that people are talking about common law. I'm gratified they're talking about constitutional law. Because 15 years ago, when I started this, nobody was. And 15 years ago, when I started talking about treason at the highest levels of government, nobody was talking about treason. Now everybody is talking about treason.
Yeah, but not many understand it. That's the problem.
I just wish that they would understand what treason is, because it is closely defined as to what is treason.
It's like we was discussing the other day, treason in the realm. I mean, the difference between, for instance, like terrorism and treason within the realm. I mean, that's an interesting place to start in itself.
Yeah. Well, it's like I said to the two anti-terrorist police. If you catch somebody here who's about to walk into a pub on a disco night with an explosive vest on and blow themselves up, you arrest them and charge them under the Terrorism Act. And they said, yes, we do. And I said, well, if they hold a British passport, or if they don't hold a British passport, they are a foreign national, but they live here and have done for some time under the protection of English law, the correct charge is treason for making war on Her Majesty's subjects within the realm.
Yeah, treason within the realm. And that goes, because that's subject and denizen.
Yeah, if the bloke comes over from France this week with the intention of blowing himself up next week, then in fact that's dealt with under the anti-terrorism laws. But all of the people that you've arrested so far for anti-terrorism law, under the anti-terrorism laws, they have all of them held a British passport.
Yep.
So they should all of them, every last one of them, should have been charged with treason.
Well, this is the misappropriation of the law, isn't it? Really?
When Tony Blair removed the death penalty for treason, he made treason more likely. You've only got to look at our government front benches to see that, because if you remove the final ultimate penalty for treason, which is death, then you make treason a win-win situation. If you get away with your treason, you get the country and, you know, everything that goes with it. But if you get caught and you get sent to prison, you know, you get sentenced to prison for life, you're going to be out after 10 years in all probability. In the meantime, you've had your story written, ghost written for you. The money from the book is paid into an offshore account because you can't pay it into an English bank because you can't make a profit out of it.
Into a nice secure trust.
Then they make it into a major American Hollywood blockbuster, and all that money goes into an offshore account. So you end up with more money in your offshore account than you could ever have dreamed about, or you end up with a country. If the threat is there that if you commit treason, you will die, you'll get nothing, it takes away a little bit of the sugar for committing treason, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's not just that. It's even, I mean, a lot of people don't understand this. I mean, it's like when we did the charges that lot against Keir Starmer and Sadiq Khan and stuff like that, and the Met Police actually backed it. It included things like malfeasance, but malfeasance at a common law level. And a lot of people don't realise malfeasance at a common law level still holds life imprisonment. And it's things like that. So if we go back to our laws, not the ones that the government, like you mentioned, Tony Blair, when he changed treason laws, and not to suit them and to bend the law to their will and to their wants. If we actually stick with what generations after generations, our ancestors way back all the way through. It's like Godfrey Bloom said the other night, the average man on the omnibus in Clacton. If we start with that, what we all can agree on is just and fair. Then if we go back to that, our laws, them type of laws, then when we're talking about these MPs who are said, like, this is why I sort of wanted to read your letter, because when we talk about these MPs that are selling PPE contracts and then making money off them and stuff like that, and being completely corrupt, when we talk about things like malfeasance, now malfeasance is not as high up. I mean, that holds life imprisonment, but then you've got sedition, you've got misprision of treason. I mean, you've got a lot of things. I mean, if we truly actually started upholding our constitution, our common law, I doubt if these MPs would be so brave.
Yeah, I had basically a barrister that I knew, and I really liked him. He worked for the government, but so he can't actually do anything with his name on it. But I asked him over the Maastricht Treaty. I explained what I wanted him to do, and he wrote up the Maastricht allegation treason in line with what I'd asked him to do, but in full legal terminology. And we supplied the allegation of treason, a copy of the Maastricht Treaty, and the relevant legislation that dealt with that treason. And we sent it off to, I think, every police station in the country. Every police force in the country got a copy. Every chief constable who failed to investigate that allegation is guilty of misprision of treason. But you've got to find somebody in authority who's going to arrest that chief constable, and Well,
I believe it's your paperwork we use, because we've done, like, myself and Gary, like we've done Sings in the Dragons, but even with CMW, I believe it was your paperwork that you had to me that I managed to get on, actually got a judge to put on court record. So it wasn't just put in with the police stations. That paperwork is actually now on court record. Literally, this is why we keep saying it. We've had cases that are backed by the Met Police. We've got evidence, an actual crime, to the point where there is no argument against it, i.e. your paperwork written by the barrister. That is now on court record. That was done when we went to Scotland Yard, stuff like that. We've now got this literally on record. So now it's a case of, when are the people actually going to start stand up saying, we want this done? Because that's what it's going to take. It's not going to be a case of, well, we'll just leave it up to some brave country. No, it's going to now take us to go, right, well, we know this has happened. We know this is true. We want this done. Because it's on record. And there is, like I said, for a judge to put that on record, I was quite surprised. And there is witnesses to that, and they said the same thing. For the judge to say, I'm putting it in the court record, I must admit, my mouth cut up. I was like, yeah, you're going to do it. Like, yeah.
Blackburn versus Regina, the Commissioner of Police versus Regina. Blackburn was a man who lived in a street where an illegal gaming club existed.
Oh.
He complained to the police because they were coming out. They were very noisy. They damaged the cars and everything else. He complained to the police. The local chief superintendent refused to investigate. So he went to court. And there were 3 judges in the case. Lord Denham was one. Lord Stockdale was the other. I think it was Stockdale. And there was another one, Lord Brown. And the police say that Denham, in that ruling, gave them a right to decide which crimes they're investigating, which they don't. But what Lord Denham actually said was that the police, a chief officer of police, must have the right to allocate his limited resources to the best of his ability.
Yeah.
But if he decided, if he took a decision not to investigate thefts of crimes of theft of less than £100, then the courts could overturn that. Because he'd taken a policy decision not to do that. The Lord, I think it's Stockdale, it'd be in my book somewhere, but I think it was Stockdale. He said that where the Commissioner of Police uses his prerogative not to prosecute a teenage boy for sleeping with a girl under the age of 16, a 15-year-old girl, then that's a correct use of his prerogative. And in any case, the courts would be unlikely to administer any punishment because of the closeness of their ages.
Yeah, proportionate policing.
And he said, but if the chief officer of police took a policy decision not to investigate housebreaking, which they did recently.
Yeah, they have, and rape allegations and stuff like that, and some violent,
which they did recently, and basically, he said that every householder in the area would be able to apply to the courts for an order of mandamus, and the courts would grant the order. The third judge, Lord Brown, he said, the argument advanced so eloquently by the Metropolitan Police's barrister is both bald and startling. And if the courts agreed with that, that would place the police above the law, and that the courts will never do.
No. Well, this is why we have things like Section 26 of the
basically every time we reported treason, we get a letter from the Chief Constable's secretary saying, we get to pick and choose. So I then got that I got that printed up, that court case printed up, which my barrister found for me. He wrote it all up for me. We then photocopied it 43 times. We sent it off to every chief constable in the country and said, in future, do not tell us that Lord Denham said this, because he didn't.
I mean, this is a problem I think we found inside, because there's a lot changed. Like I said, common law is coming back, things like that, and it is hard work, I'd say, for people like yourself, us, and other people doing. I mean, and this is where we've got to really somehow. How do we get people? Because like you can get hundreds of thousands of people that will follow and back a person who makes a phone call to the council, or will go into a police station and give in kind of, I don't know, a notice to cease and desist. They can get hundreds of thousands of people that will back that. But yet it's like, it's like the cases we've done that we have on court record that judges have backed, cases you've done that will actually prosecute, that will actually reset the law and will actually do some good. Where's the traction for it? Why is it that people go for gimmicks over actual law? I don't understand it.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that an act of parliament is the law of the land, and it's legally enforceable as the law of the land. However, there is a stipulation that the act of parliament must comply with the spirit of the common law.
Yeah.
So if you
not to be constitutionally
if you take the Road Traffic Act, the object of the Road Traffic Act is to save lives and protect property. So it complies completely with the spirit of the Road Traffic Act. It complies with the spirit of the common law. When the government then put into the Road Traffic Act that if you're driving around without insurance, they can seize your vehicle and crush it. That
Contrary
does
to common
not
law.
comply with the spirit of the common law.
No.
So that part of the law is illegal.
And there's also, I mean, you'll find it in houses. There's also acts and statutes can be given the force of law only by consent of the governed, and that is individual.
That's not actually true.
It's in Hounsbury. I've had that with judges because I had a big long discussion with a judge.
Once it's been passed by Parliament, it is the law, with the exception that if it's a bad law, according to Judge Fortescue from 1420, there is no such thing as a bad law, for if it is bad, it's not law.
It's void.
So if the law that if the policeman is shouting at you about a law and it is a bad law, then it's not a law. And if he attempts to arrest you or do anything else using that bad law, then you're entitled to resist the arrest, even if that means putting the policeman down on the floor unconscious, because the police officer doesn't have a right to overrule the law of the land.
But this is I did this outside Scotland Yard because I was arrested outside Scotland Yard for petition considered Dick, and it was for crimes of sedition and treason, amongst other stuff. And that went actually, I mean, so I didn't put the constable down, but I did go through due process. It landed up in the High Court of Appeal, to which it all just disappeared because of that very fact. I do not have to obey an unlawful order, and the constable had no jurisdiction to underwrite the constitutional duty to actually highlight and uphold that law.
A police officer only has jurisdiction insofar as he's upholding a legitimate law.
Yeah.
That's the only time he has jurisdiction. Other than that, it's gone wrong. But you see, the police, the government, have decided to isolate the police from the public.
Yeah.
They've come along. They've done two things. Firstly, they've told the police that every time they talk to a member of the public, they must put a full report in about it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're walking the beat down the road and you see Harry, who runs Jones's Butchers, and you start talking to him about the price of sausages this week, you have to write that down and put it in as a report. A complete and utter waste of police time. If you sit down and talk to Mrs. Brown about what a lovely dog she's got, you have to write that down. And so the net result
it's all intel gathering.
You walk down the street. You walk down the street and you don't talk to anybody because basically you don't want all that writing because it's pointless.
Yeah.
The other thing that has happened is that the police have given, or the government have given the police stab vests, ballistic vests. They've given them
paramilitary equipment.
They've given them CS gas. They've given them tasers and everything else. And so the police are then feeling, well, I can't go out on the street without all this stuff because the public will attack me and I won't be safe unless I've got all this stuff on. Right?
But therein lies a threat of assault on us.
The last thing the public are interested in doing is attacking a policeman. But the public see him walking down the street dressed like some sort of Gestapo officer, completely in black, and they think
he's paramilitary.
That's not a copper. That's not the copper I know. I'm worried about him. He's the enemy.
What do you think? A constabulary's uniform is blue and white. But most of the officers that we see in the streets today are dressed in paramilitary gear. And like you say, it's like they've got black and white vests, they've got black and white uniform, they've got a logo that should never actually be on a constable, i.e. the black flag. You've got, like you say, you've got literally, they're armed to the teeth. It's like we are not allowed to walk around armed, and as like I said, this is why we look to Magna Carta. That's where sort of it's really cemented. Nobody is above the law. So it's like saying, why should a constable have preferential treatment to protect his often corrupt behaviour, and we don't have ours? Why do they have the right to self-protection and we don't?
You see, there are things.
Surely, I mean, because I had this argument with a judge, and he actually landed up arguing.
There are things you can do, Nathan. There are things you can do. I made for myself a walking stick because I use a stick now because I'm not mobile. And I made a walking stick out of a timber called wenge, which is a cross between rosewood and ebony. And it's a very hard wood. It splinters like anything. And the splinters, if they get them in your fin and you don't get them out straight away, they poison you. But I made this stick with a T-cross handle on it. Now, if I was attacked, I have got a weapon there, which if I hit them on the head with the handle, I can fracture their skull. You know, if I hit them on the arm or the leg, which is where I would hit them with a truncheon, then I can break an arm or a leg because it's a really solid piece of timber.
Yeah.
Now,
it's hard.
You can carry a walking stick if you want to. Now, I put that down in a restaurant somewhere and went out without it. I haven't seen it since. But I mean, basically, I use walking sticks. So I go everywhere and I've got something in my hand that I can use to defend myself. And the law is you might not be able to walk around with a bar of iron to defend yourself. But if you are attacked and you see a bar of iron conveniently lying there, you can pick it up and use it to defend yourself.
Yeah.
You know? And so basically, people need educated as to what they can and can't do legally.
Well, this is the thing.
Have legally.
This is the thing. This is a struggle. I think some people who do actually know the law have at the moment. You've got a lot of people who claim they know common law, claim they know the law, and yet, I mean, they will openly threat violence on Facebook and stuff like that, not knowing that that's actually a breach.
I mean, I'll tell you what I find difficult to understand. Many years ago, a young Greek girl walked past a West Indian house and she was dragged into the house and gang raped, and they chucked her out. And she went home and she told her mum. And 2 hours later, just about every Greek restaurant in London was shut, and all these Greeks were going into this house with meat cleavers and big butcher's knives. Now, the police sat outside. When the Greeks came out, just picked them up, took the knife and the meat cleaver off them, put them in the back of the van. Then they sent the ambulance crews in to pick up all the black guys who raped the girl. A few years later, a young Sikh girl walking past a kebab shop, she was dragged in and gang raped. And she went home and told her mum. They didn't think she would, because being Sikhs, then you've got this honour thing, haven't you?
Yeah.
They didn't think she'd tell her mum. But about 80 Sikhs with their ceremonial swords an hour later went into that shop and carved everybody up inside in it. Now, 2 Sikhs were arrested, but nobody was charged. The reason they weren't charged is, and the reason that the Greeks weren't charged, was because the government did not want it known that if your child was gang raped or whatever by one of these immigrants, then you could go out and you could actually go out and do it yourself. You could deal with it yourself. You know what I mean?
But it's going back to like the militia justice, isn't it? Most people when they hear the word militia, they go, "Oh, that's a bad thing." Actually, it's not. Militia in its original form was actually what kept the peace.
I cannot understand the will, the mindset of the parents of all these girls who've been raped and prostituted by the Muslim rape gangs, and who've sat at home and done nothing. And when they've complained to the police have said to them, "Well, if you say anything else, we're going to arrest you." You know, I'd say to them, "Well, bloody well arrest me." I told the 2 anti-terrorism officers who sat in my living room, "If you want to arrest me, arrest me. Understand, I've never gone to court and not got the result I wanted." You know? So you arrest me, but you will lose in court. And basically, I can't understand why it is that no parents have actually gone out and actually taken the law into their own hands and dealt with this, and why when the police have actually said, "Look, you know, if you do this, you're going to get arrested," why the hell the police station wasn't burnt down? I can't understand that.
Well, this is
sure as hell, if it was my daughter, I would ask the police to deal with it. If they weren't prepared to, then I would say, right, well, that's it. The police have abrogated their authority here. I'm going to deal with this.
Exactly.
You know what
Exactly. I would act within the law, and I'd do due process. And if that due process failed, I'd make sure the process didn't fail.
I mean? And if I got arrested and taken to court, I'd say, well, the police weren't prepared to uphold the law. My action was simply maintaining the rule of law.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
my action was just maintaining the rule of law.
We lost Gary, but yeah, well, I'm going to wrap it up there. Before we go, can you just give your book, the details for your book and your email again? So if you want Albert's book, whether to buy it or whether you want to email Albert and get the full version.
The Layman's Guide to the English Constitution. If you buy it on the net, for God's sake, don't buy it off of Amazon or anybody, because I've seen one advertised on Amazon for £90 odd. Don't do that. If you go to the publisher, which is Lulu, it's an online publisher, you'll buy it for about £7. You can get it in Kindle version for about £1.50 or something. But if you want it free and you want all the extra, twice as much information as it is, if you email me at albertburgess@hotmail.com, all lowercase, all one word, and just ask me for the book, and I will email you the copy from my desktop, which contains twice as much information as is in the printed version.
No, because I think because I say this to most people, and I do actually refer to your book. If you're not, if you're just getting into trying to learn the Constitution, Albert's book is the perfect place to start. I mean, don't go jumping into things like this, because often you'll get overwhelmed. And you'll just turn away. The best thing to do is, like I said, start with say like Albert's book, and then work off that, because it is a very, very good introduction, and that it is a very good book. It's well written. I'll say that much. I've said that when I first read it when you first gave me a copy. So yeah,
well, I wrote it for children to understand.
Yeah.
So it's written for 9-year-olds to understand. Nathan's read it. He'll tell you it is a very easy read.
Yeah, but this is the thing. The reason why I read it there, because I wouldn't be taught to read it, and my daughter's just turning 8 now. That's the reason why I was actually there, because I was already on to put this, but the whole point of CMW, our main goal is we want the Constitution and common law and our rights back in schools. So when I was put onto your book and you gave me a copy, I was very interested, and I read it, and I didn't actually. This is the thing. When I read it, I didn't put it down. I actually read it from cover to cover in one, because it does. It kind of leads you through things. It keeps you going, and it's well written.
It takes about half an hour, Nathan, doesn't it?
Yeah, literally, yeah, about 20 minutes to 40 minutes max, maybe. Some maybe about an hour. But if you want to read a thing, I mean, to understand it, you can go back and read it. But it's not a massive book. It's well written. It's easy manageable for I would say all learning abilities. So I think it's the perfect start for most people. But yeah, so please grab his book, read it. Please tune in more. We're going to have Albert back again. And there will be more. Again, we've got to start understanding this, and it's like Albert and I've been discussing tonight about self-defense, your right under law to do certain things, what law actually is. A lot of constables they know a lot of acts and statutes, but a lot of them don't actually know the law. This is the problem. So it is time we educate everybody. And it is things like Albert, with your case, with our cases, we've actually got cases that are actually solid cases that are upholdable. These are not like somebody just quickly jotting down a notice of cease and desist on their computer, then just going to a police station and hoping that or somebody writing saying and hoping that a court's going to all of a sudden go and arrest the whole thing. These are actually, this is the law, and this is well researched, this is well written. There's about 4. There's your case, our case. There's about 4 cases that I know of. I mean, I've actually personally got your case put onto court record. We've also got the Met Police actually back one of our other cases, and that's further than anybody's got. But I just don't understand why people won't actually back it. This is what I don't get. You've actually got a chance to have it all sorted.
Come in briefly on legalese, Nathan. There's a lot of talk on the internet about legalese. English courts do not use legalese. We use the ordinary Oxford English meaning of the word. Now, I looked up last night the how many words are in the English language. Now, in the latest version of the Oxford English Dictionary, there are 171,146 words. There are also another 42,700 of words that are obsolete. Now, our courts use words, some of which are very old, because
Yes.
courts have been using it. So,
And you've got and in law you've got the Latin and you've got French.
So, out of those 42,000 words, you're going to find that some of them are still used in the court today. So when the barrister or a judge uses some of these words, and you just simply don't understand them. I mean, I've got a concise Oxford English Dictionary where they're 2 volumes, and they're massive volumes, and they come complete with a magnifying glass, because the print is so small you can't read it.
Yeah.
And I've seen words in there that I have never heard of.
Yeah.
I have never heard of it. I've never
I struggle reading that one.
I can't pronounce them, and I sure as hell can't spell them. But they are ordinary, everyday English words. I think the average number of words that the ordinary man talks is between 1,000 and 5,000 words. That's what we use on a day-to-day basis. And that's out of the 171,460, whatever it is, words in the Oxford English Dictionary today. Not possible to know them all. So when somebody comes up in a court of law and they use a word that you don't know, it's not legalese, it's just ordinary English that you don't know it. And what you should do is you should just simply put your hand up and say to the judge, I've never heard of that word, can you explain to me what it means?
Yeah, there's no such thing as a stupid question.
And they will do it. They will explain it to you.
I think the confusion is, and a lot of people with legalese, is because the courts actually they do, it's correct, they go by the Oxford English Dictionary, but there's also another, because there's 2 dictionaries. There's also the Oxford Dictionary of Law, and often the definitions in the Oxford Dictionary of Law are different to those of that in the Oxford English Dictionary. Yeah. So and they often use the terms in the Law Dictionary. And often most of them are legal terms, and that's where the legalese and everything comes from, because they use the lawful words. Most
people today on the internet, they talk about Black's Law.
Yeah.
Well, Black's Law is an American publication. It deals with American law.
Well, I've got Black's Law.
And American law, as it is similar to ours, but it's not the same, and the word meanings are not the same.
No, exactly. I mean, I've got Black's Law, I think I've got 5 to 9, I think. And I've only got them because I actually sort of talk to people in America, and because it's a constitutional movement worldwide, so we have different countries. But I've been told, it was a judge who told me, it was a judge who put it up to me, and you can actually look it up. Our courts actually use the Oxford English Dictionary and the Oxford Dictionary of Law for definition in this country. We don't use Black's Law. I mean, you can get some judges that if you use Black's Law, for instance, you'd be using, for instance, 1 to 5. That some may accept that definition, because it's very similar, because it's in the old style English, stuff like that. But anything after 5, they're not going to accept, because that's when you get the complete split from American. The American version to the English version.
If you can't afford a lawyer, you can't afford a solicitor and a barrister, and you go there as a litigant in person, the first thing you should do is say to the judge, whatever court you're in, say to the judge, I'm a litigant in person, I'm not legally trained. I'm going to put my argument in ordinary everyday English. If you could explain the law to me, I'd be very grateful. Now, I know a barrister, and she said to me that when people do this, and the judge actually sits down and explains the law to the litigant in person, 999 times out of 1,000, the judge will come down with his ruling on the side of the litigant in person. They've never got a choice, just giving him what the law is.
Exactly. But this is a problem.
know,
Some judges get round that because some
Yeah.
judges, they will say, I could not give you legal advice. And barristers, what a lot of people don't know, especially if you're a litigating person, you can actually ask the judge, and you can actually ask the prosecution to clarify points of law.
If you ask the judge for help and he says, I can't give you advice, so I'm not interested in you giving me advice, I will make my argument in the way that I think. But what I want from you is the meaning of the law and how the law affects what my argument is about. The judge is required to do that.
Yep, you can actually ask the prosecution to clarify law as well. They don't like it, and again, they'll try and say, I cannot give you legal advice, and you have to clarify. So I'm not asking for legal advice, I'm asking you to clarify this point of law, please.
Don't be frightened of the judge or the barristers. Don't be frightened of them. Just talk to them in ordinary, everyday English. Put your story, and you'll do it. Now, I was in court, and my evidence was I'd arrested a drink driver. My evidence was I first became aware of the vehicle when it was 300 to 400 yards in front of me. The magistrate said, was it 300 or 400 yards? And I said, well, Your Worship, it was a very long straight road, a very badly lit road, and a very dark night. The vehicle was coming directly towards me. My best estimate is 300 to 400 yards. And he said, I don't want 300 to 400 yards. I want 300 or 400 yards. I said, can I clarify a point with you? And he said, yes. I said, are you ordering me to change my evidence from 300 to 400 yards to 300 or 400 yards? And he said, yes. And I said, would you like to reconsider that? And he said, why? I said, well, because if you persist in that, I will have no option but to leave the witness books, come up to the bench and arrest you for attempting to pervert the course of justice. There was a huge intake of breath throughout the courtroom. The stenographer completely lost it. Her hands were all over the place. And somebody in the public gallery said, oh, fuck, the cop was going to nick the judge. You know what I mean?
Well, this is there's the argument over that because technically speaking, you can't arrest a sitting judge.
The magistrate then found the man guilty, and instead of giving him the normal £175 in a year's ban, because he couldn't kick me, he kicked him. So he gave him a 3-year ban and a £375 fine. You know, I felt quite sorry for the bloke in the end.
But it's the thing. The problem is like the courts have actually got a lot worse since you would be in one now. But this is the thing. But there is another thing I'd like to clarify about legalese, is because there is a distinction thing, and most of where you'll get the thing from legalese is because there is actually a separate language that is actually, and this was confirmed to be by multiple people within the court system, there is what you call the language of the law society. And that is actually used in a court of law between the barristers and the judge. And that's the difference. It's not actually meant to be used against you, but they are actually allowed to use the language of the law society when conversing within a court. There's a judge who actually told me about that, which I was quite interested in. So it's made a lot of sense when he told me. It's one of them. But it's basically to cut down time, and it's that thing, but a lot of it can be used nefariously. But there is such a thing as language of the law society. Now, if you speak about that in a court and watch the barristers and the judges' faces that don't think you know it, watch what they look like. Because you're not meant to know that there's the language of the law society. Because it's not meant to be used. As you say, but it's not. It's meant to be done in plain, understandable English.
Right, Nathan, I'm going to have to go.
All right, Mike. Thank you for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure as always, Albert. We'll have to get you on again.
Well, give me a shout if you want me again.
Definitely. I reckon we're going to have a lot of questions that people are going to want you to clarify.
Well,
I think definitely like with the self-defence and the common law.
People want to email me questions on my email address. I'm quite happy to talk to them. Or on Facebook, I don't mind. I'm quite happy to answer their questions.
Brilliant. And it's the thing, because this thing, people need to start being educated properly.
Okay.
There is discrepancies with some of us, with all of us probably on certain points, because obviously it's understanding, but most of us actually understand the law. I would say, we agree on the facts of law. You can't argue over it.
Yeah.
Interpretation and the implementation of law. I don't know. We can all debate till I think the sun comes up. I don't know, but one of them. But no, thank you for coming on. It's been amazing.
All right, then, Nathan.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right. See you later. Bye. thank you everyone. Thank you everyone in the chat. Again, please grab Albert's book. If you don't know about the Constitution, or like I said, kids can read it as well. So if you don't know about the Constitution, you want to start learning. If you heard any of the topics tonight, like with the self-defence and stuff like that, and you've been, get in touch. I'll try and organise a bit more of an in-depth discussion with a few people, because there's a few people we can have on who can discuss this that know it. Get behind the people that know the law. Stop getting behind people who do gimmicks and just want your likes and shares and you to boost their PayPal. Some of us are actually in this for the right reasons, and we're serious about it. I mean, some of us have been researching for many years, not just watching a couple of YouTube videos. As Albert said, I mean, he's been researching and doing this a few years longer than me, just couple of years longer than me. So he's been doing it longer than I have. So please get in touch. Any questions you'd like, anything, write down at the video at the end of this. What I'll try and do is I'll try and get all the information about Albert's book and everything. Any information you want, I'll put it under the video. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.